You see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good morning, everyone. Before I introduce our speaker today, just one side note. I don't think we have any of the sheets back there to tell me what you guys want to hear, so I'm approachable. If you've got an idea for a speaker, please let me know. If you've got a name, please let me know, and if they have contact information. This club's your club. I want these speakers for you guys. It's not what I want, it's what everybody wants. So if you got an idea, get a hold of me and let me know, okay? We got thrown a curveball today. My speaker that was supposed to be here, and you all probably looked at the website, was supposed to be a gentleman from the Army Corps of Engineers speaking about the dams and locks of western Pennsylvania. However, yesterday about 11:30, I got an email from him. He tested positive for COVID, so that kind of threw a monkey wrench into everything. So I spent most of yesterday on the phone trying to get magician or a musical group of some kind. Anyway, we were very fortunate, I should say I'm very fortunate, that a gentleman stepped up by the name of Jack Teitz, and I think he's going to give us a really nice presentation. He's the president of the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame. He spent 35 years total as a referee in the college arena, of which 21 years of that was in the Big Ten. So I think he has lots of good stories about some football games, some big classic football games, and football in general. So let's welcome Jack Teitz.
Thanks, everyone. I brought a couple of props with me, and I don't have a big AV budget, which is zero. So. And I guess this is going to be filmed and on the website or something later. So I apologize for not having a bigger version of this. But one of my favorite pictures, I'm going to tell you a little bit of history of how I got involved and over time, how it played out. But this is Joe Paterno and I. I was a sideline official in the Big Ten for 21 years. I think a couple of weeks ago when I was here, I gave you my favorite line. I've been booed by more than 20 million people in person. So if anybody here, isn't excited about what I'm saying and you boo, it won't bother me in the least. 49 more will not make a difference. I will tell you real quickly, my wife has occasionally booed me, as has my deceased mother. So those are a couple of parts of the story. I was very fortunate. I got to work the national championship game at the college level. Hold the mic closer, sure. So this is one of the commemorative balls that we were able to get as part of that, and I'll just set the stuff up here. If anybody's interested, you can look at it later. But I thought I would start with my success at the end and then work my way back. We also, and I showed our wonderful filming guy earlier, I also got a championship ring. That, again, if anybody's interested in seeing it, it'll be on the website, a little better picture than that. But this is something I wear proudly. I don't wear it often, but when I come out to speak or if I'm at one of the Hall of Fame events, I wear it. So what does an official need? Everybody seen flags? Everybody's seen the coin they toss before the game and at overtime. Oh, I got a chance to work 9 bowl games during my 21-year tenure in the Big Ten. So generally, you got a swag bag at every bowl game. So part of my swag, this was the 50th playing of the Liberty Bowl between Kentucky and East Carolina. The date's probably on here, but it's so small I can't see it. Other things that you've seen, obviously the hat, whistles, one whistle. This is my commemorative whistle from 100 years ago. It still has the lip guard on it. That's disintegrated. And a beanbag. I don't know if people notice whenever there's a fumble or end of a kick, the officials throw something down. And part of the reason they do that is because that becomes an important spot of enforcement of penalties if something else happens during the play. So again, it's not particularly scientifically special, but it is something that every official has, and you have to throw it whenever there's a fumble. And then something that saved my career. Most of the officials will wear a wrist down indicator. And I'll tell you a story in a minute about how important this is. So after every play, you change this from first down, second down, third down, fourth down. Doesn't seem like that big a deal until there's some confusion on the field. And then when there's confusion on the field, you got 7 guys who should have this on the same finger. And when they don't, it can be a near disaster. All right. So I started out here in Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Mount Washington, went to school down at Georgetown. I came back, and I thought about coaching a little bit, but my career was such that that wasn't going to work. So I ended up officiating, and I started out working Pee Wee football, started to work middle school, junior high, high school, and it probably took me 4 years to get from the Pee Wee football to the high school level. And I worked high school level locally, including some WPIAL playoff games and things, probably 8 or 9 years. And then I started to work small college. So I was working Carnegie Mellon, Slippery Rock, Indiana, and all the schools locally here in Western Pennsylvania. There's a pecking order to it. There's a political part to it. And then you've got to be pretty good. One of the things I worked very hard to do was make sure that I knew the rules better than anybody else in Western Pennsylvania. So we'd take an annual rules exam. There would be questions all the time. And again, things that come up, most of it's relatively mundane. I mean, I think anybody in the room, you could call offsides if somebody went across the line and the ball got snapped. But stuff starts to get a little more complicated when you look at holding, you're looking at defensive pass interference and offensive pass interference. And the players get more sophisticated. The teaching gets more sophisticated. And I like to tell everybody, the rule book, both at the high school level and at the college level, it's a smaller version of the IRS tax code. So the first 10 pages are pretty straightforward and include the definitions so that everybody can understand, the black and the white. But the entire game is played in the gray. So you got something that's clearly a foul, you got something that's never a foul, and then there's this whole cross-section of stuff that is maybe. And the maybe part is what makes the coaches crazy, because coaches want consistency. They want consistency from me, the 7 guys on my crew, and then crew to crew, game to game. They want people to kind of view things and judge things the same way. And as hard as I've worked during my 35 years with wonderful people who are committed to this as well, we were never quite able to get it perfectly aligned. So I would say this is a foul, and then we would turn around and we'd look at it, and the other 6 guys on the crew would go, nope. So you go, how do you get that further aligned? So there's a whole grading process. One of the things I probably worked about 250 games at the college level, and I was graded on all 250 of those games basically by 4 people. Each team, either the head coach or they designated an assistant coach who was responsible for grading the officials, and then there was a retired official in the press box. I would get a grade from that person, and then the supervisor of officials that I worked for, they would grade it based on the film review. So every game that I worked, I would get 4 ratings. They would be from 0, which was never good, to 7, which was a pretty good grade. There were generally 3 or 4 categories of grading based on judgment, based on interaction, based on did you look good at what you were doing? And so there were a lot of those factors, and every game, every year, that evaluation process is what resulted in people being selected to work the bowl games and to work the national championship game. The year I got to work the national championship game, there were 1,680 plays that I was, participated in. I had 3 errors. So when you look at that kind of, I'm trying to get to this perfection theme again. When you look at the number of plays that are involved and the number of people looking at it and how it works, there's a really small, level of differentiation between the guys who are at the top with my 3 errors and probably the guy that year that was lowest as the headlinesman probably had 7 or 8. So it's a pretty small window. You look at it again, I had 21 one-year contracts in the Big Ten. You're a 1099 person. So that evaluation drives whether they invite you back, whether they wave bye-bye, or, again, whether the next level, the NFL is looking at you. And generally, there would be, 2 or 3 guys each year in the Big Ten that would move into the NFL ranks. There would be 5 or 6 guys that wouldn't be invited back. And then the majority of us, and there was generally 50 to 52 year in and year out, most of us would get invited back, assuming that, again, watch my language, we didn't screw it up. In terms of games and stories, I guess there's probably a couple. I think I told a couple of guys, everybody wants to know, what was the best call I ever had out of the 250 games and, 200 plays a game. There was a game back in 1997, Penn State was playing at Purdue. And the Penn State guys, and the reason I bring the picture of Joe Paterno, when you're in a particular geography, you work generally their spring games. So in spring practices, you work their fall practices, and then when the season starts, everybody has to kind of back away, and you're not as close to the people. But I'm on the Penn State sideline at Purdue, and that was when Purdue was throwing bubble screens. And the football folks in here, if you know what that is, the quarterback kind of steps back and throws it to the sideline. Drew Brees was the quarterback at that point at Purdue, and LeVar Arrington was the star linebacker at Penn State. And on this particular play, we're in the second quarter, and again, what's important, this was pre-replay. So the bubble screen comes my way, and I've got to judge, is the ball thrown forward or backward, because it affects the rest of what happens, and was it caught behind or beyond the line of scrimmage, because that affects what happens. This particular situation comes out, ball was thrown forward, receiver caught up behind the line of scrimmage. He's here where John is. I'm on the sideline. And so I can start to look to see what the blocking situation is in advance of him because there's no one near him. So as I do this and I turn and come back, John's getting tackled. You go, how the hell did that happen? So I instinctively throw my flag. We're on national television. My referee walks over and he goes, what do you got, Jack? I go, Dick, I don't know, but I think the guy ran off the sideline and made the tackle. So we got Keith Jackson broadcasting the game on national television. He says there seems to be heated debate down there, and we're not sure what's going on. So they didn't see it happen either. So we penalized, and the whole Penn State sideline now is yelling, he was out there, he was out there, he was out there. The more they're yelling he was out there, the more I'm thinking they're full of shit. So the thing that saves you is you go back and we count the players on offense and defense, and everybody's got responsibility. So I go to the back judge and I said, how many players did Penn State have on the field to start that play? He said they only had 10. I said, I'm sure now, Dick, this guy ran off the sideline, made the tackle. So we enforced the penalty and we finished the game, and it ends in a classic 1st and goal from the 8. Purdue's got the ball, they're down 4 plays in the end zone, bang, bang, stuff happens. The last play, they're rolling out towards my sideline. LeVar Arrington is chasing Drew Brees. Brees throws the ball. And so I kind of have responsibility right near the sideline, and I've got to look to where the ball is thrown. It's incomplete. I look back. Those 2 guys are both laying there looking up to see whether the ball was caught or whether the game's over. At that point, it was incomplete. Game was over. Arrington got up off of Brees, helped him up. They gave each other a high five, and it was just one of those classic good things about sports experiences. So I always talk about that particular game. Other games that were particularly relevant, and again, at some point, if anybody has any questions, let me know. This saved my career. One of the first games I had, and on my way from the local college level up to the Big Ten, I worked 2 years for the ECAC. And the ECAC was kind of the New England state schools, the Patriot League, the Ivy League, those particular schools. The first year I was up there, I had a pretty good season as a rookie. At that point, I was, 37 years old and had a decent amount of experience here in Western Pennsylvania. That was my first exposure to guys, across the East Coast. And there were, again, a lot of really good officials and a lot of really good people. The second year, the second game, I'm with a different crew the second year, and I'm with a curmudgeon of an old guy who's still a good friend, and he was the referee. It is Columbia at Harvard, and I'm on the Columbia sideline. And again, the coaches are in my ear. Every game, up and down the field, the coaches, are trying to convince me why we are completely screwing up this game, and he should be winning, which is not usually the case, but that's how it gets parlayed. Early in the second quarter of this particular game, the ball's thrown to my sideline, and I have a pass interference on the offense. The tight end comes out, kind of gives him a shove, turns and catches the ball and gets tackled. And so my penalty flag's down, and at that point in time, I think it was a 15-yard penalty at that point and a loss of down. They keep changing the distances and all. But with the loss of down, it should have been second down. So I have my handy-dandy band, and I move it to second down. And I go back to the sideline, and somehow, inadvertently, the guy on the box, he puts up a 3. Now, my referee looks over. He goes, third down. I go, wait, no. Joe, second down. Joe looks back at me. He goes, kid, it's third down. We had a loss of down. So now I got the Columbia coach comes over. He says, Jack, I can't believe, you're going to let us lose a down here. And again, I'm the youngest guy in this crew, and I go trotting out, and Joe looks around. Everybody goes 3, 3, 3, 3. I still have 2. We come back over. They come out of the huddle again. They're getting ready to go. And once the play gets run, you can't go back and change it. You've got to fix it in the dead ball period between downs. Coach is still in my ear. I go, wave my hands. I come trotting back out. Joe goes, what are you doing now? I said, Joe, if we don't fix this, we're going to lose a down. And I don't think anybody else is going to get fired except for me. So we're not going to go until you make it second down. He now goes to the other 6 guys on the crew. He goes, and everybody that was going third is now going, look away. Everybody, when you're in the officiating business and you're getting support, people will look at you and you'll get some kind of a signal. When people don't want to get involved, they go, just look away. Not me. You're not pinning this on me. So I come out. Joe goes, well, it looks like some of the supporters of third down have now backed off. What do you think I should do? I said, well, we're going to make it second down, but they're charting the plays on the Columbia side. They're charting the plays on the Harvard side. Why don't you trot over and see what down Harvard has? So he goes, good idea. He runs over to the Harvard bench, and I see them talking. The head coach turns to somebody else and comes back, and he runs back out. He says, they don't know for sure. Harvard and Columbia, those bastions of ethical, consideration, football can't be that important there. They don't know. So now I go, Joe, really? So he goes, we're going to go with second down. I said, great. I go back over. The Columbia coach goes, wow, I can't believe you got that done. We go on. We finish the game. Harvard wins, 35-14 or something, fairly substantially. The important part of this story is the supervisor of officials for the ECAC, a guy by the name of Al Benson, who's since passed away. He was the observer at that game. My referee and Al Benson were best friends. So he was going to believe anything Joe Arnone said, not necessarily the new young whippersnapper kid from Pittsburgh who's now up there mucking around in their East Coast football. We went after the game, and Al comes in with his notes and his clipboard and everything. He goes, pretty good game. Kind of goes around. He says, but there was a little confusion in that second quarter about what down it was. So I want to talk to all you other guys. And he points to me. I want to hear from you last. So they come out, and everybody goes, well, he says, Joe, what happened? And Joe goes, well, there was some confusion. Jack had the penalty. He had his back turned to me. He turned around and said second down. There was 3 on the box. I went with 3. So Joe said, so the box man screwed it up. He went around to the other 6 guys and said, the box man screwed it up. He went to me. He said, what happened? I said, well, there was confusion. He said, I don't want the details. I said, well, the box man screwed it up. So everybody had a big sigh of relief, Al was, fine with that, sort of. He knew exactly what happened. At the end of the day, he gave me a playoff game at the end of the year in the ECAC playoffs, which was the first time he'd given a second-year guy a playoff in his history. The following year is when I got invited to join the Big Ten. And part of how that happens, I was on a list that the Big East was looking at the time, because as you're coming up through the political order and the level of playing sophistication, other people are looking at the younger guys coming up through the ranks. And you guys in here and ladies all have some appreciation for how the politics in real life works. So Penn State decides and gets into the Big Ten. There was a pecking order in the Big East of probably 100 people that I was on the list with. In the Big Ten, when Penn State got in, there were 4 people on the list. I was number 5. And so I got an interview pretty early on. One of the people I gave as a reference was Al Benson, my supervisor in the ECAC, and he talked to the guy who hired me, Dave Perry. He said, yeah, the kid can work. We had a game where things were really going to get out of line and they were going to lose it down, and he saved the whole crew. So Dave Perry calls me and says, I understand. I was 39 at the time. I was the youngest guy getting into the Big Ten at that time. And he said, sounds like you can work, kid. Come on up and join us. So that's what kind of got me into the Big Ten. And I talk about it because it's something as simple as this. You get in a routine, you do the same thing every play, you look at the same stuff every play, and sometimes it saves your butt. Excuse me. Does anybody want to ask me any questions? Because I have more stories I can continue to tell, but I'll take questions. Go ahead.
Jack, in your experience in the collegiate area, you talked about the knowledge of rules. When you were refereeing the Big Ten, were there any changes year to year in the rules, or was it pretty much all the same?
Did everybody hear the question? Are there rule changes? There's rule changes every year. Sometimes they are substantial, like the head-to-head contact, the helmet-to-helmet contact. In the last 5 or 6 years, it's become, a very big rule change for the safety of the game. They've changed the blocking rules and the blocking below the waist rules over the last probably 10 or 15 years, again, to make it a safer sport. And then you get relatively minute changes that are in kind of the points of emphasis and interpretations. They're more subtle, but can have, again, a significant impact on how the crew prepares and how the game gets, coached and played. So yeah, there are rule changes every year. The testing that gets done every year, generally 30% of the test is on the new rules. The other 70% is on, my words again, the shit that got screwed up the prior year. So anytime there's a trend where people seem to be missing, particular files or particular nuances of the game, is what we get tested on and evaluated on. And we watch a lot of film to kind of emphasize, what the changes are. Go ahead.
Jack, at the end of the season, when the old crews are picked, you compete with maybe 5 or 6 guys that you don't know. During the year, you've been with the same crew for each game, and obviously you know each other. There's a feel for where you're going. Is that a good idea to sort of pick a special crew to do bowl games when they don't really have a history with each other?
Did everybody hear the question? At the end of the season, the way it is in the NHL or the NFL and in the college level, the playoff crews and the bowl game crews are not guys that work together all year. There's a certain advantage in each season. Just to talk about the crews, I would work with the same 7 guys for 10 or 11 games during the year. Then the following year, it might be 6 different guys and me, or 2 of us that were together. So there was always a sharing of the talent, and partly it was you're trying to evaluate the strength of the 7 guys. So you take the guys with a couple years of experience, you take some guys with a middle level of experience, and then a younger guy or 2. That becomes kind of the blend and the process by which the crews are established. Then once you get through the season, what tends to happen is the more senior guys across the league who've got more experience and who've tended to rate a little bit better just because of their performance, they get to be selected for the bowl games and for the playoffs. So from my perspective, if I could work with, two senior guys, two middle guys, and two brand-new guys, we would make that work during the year. But by the time we got to the end of the season and the monetary stakes went up and the excitement for the game went up, I'd be thrilled to have the 7 best guys in the league for that year. And again, we were learning this, being showed the same stuff. We were working the same game. So it was not as big of an issue to me as you might, perceive it as the audience. Hold
Jack,
on, this one guy in the back's been
Yeah.
waiting to ask.
What was the toughest call you had to make, the one that gave you the most difficulty in your career?
Well, the one I just talked about where the guy ran off the sideline,
Yeah.
That's the only call I ever made in my career that I didn't see what happened.
No, I meant just was offside or pass interference. What was the most difficult call that you had to evaluate in your career?
So the consistent problem that a guy on the line of scrimmage has is where are you going to put the ball, particularly at the goal line. So in the national championship game on a 4th down play, I put the ball that far from the end zone and gave it to the other team. That was the hardest judgment call that I had to make. And consistently trying to make the rulings at the goal line when guys are jumping in the air, getting pushed back. Most of the goal line plays, pretty straightforward. They end up in the end zone. But there were always, in almost every game, there was a goal line play that was going to be to some extent controversial. And depending upon the angle and who I was looking at it, and they used to have a lot of still camera when I first started, and they'd snap the photo, and they wouldn't get exactly the same look I would get, but I'd put my hands up to rule it a touchdown, and in the Chicago Tribune out there, it would show that he was like that far from the goal line, but there's me standing over there with my arms up in the air. So that was part of what the 20 million boos originated from.
Could you give us kind of a primer on, you've got 6 other guys and yourself, correct, in your crew?
Yes,
You mostly did side judge.
yes.
What are some of the other positions, and what specifically are those positions looking at?
Sure.
Just a little primer on.
Sure. So when you look at the football field and how it's divided and where the two teams are on the line of scrimmage, I always operated as a line judge or mostly a head linesman. So I had the responsibility for the next down and people moving in and out of the neutral zone. So if you look at the field, there were 2 of us on either end of the teams on the sideline on the line of scrimmage. Then there were 2 people downfield on the sideline about 20 yards down from where I was located. Same thing on the other side. Then you had 3 people in the middle. You had a referee who was, and they've now gone to 8 guys, so it's changed a little bit. But at that time, there was 1 guy behind the quarterback who was the referee. There was 1 guy right behind the defensive line who was the umpire. And then there was a back judge who was about 20 or 25 yards downfield in the middle. So we would try to you had a framework where that kind of, my word, boxed in the play that was going to happen of what those 22 people were going to do. And then for the most part, the responsibilities, while they varied a little bit, the guys on the line of scrimmage, we had comparable responsibilities for action right at the line of scrimmage, right prior to the snap and at the snap. And then we had responsibility for the tackle on our side in terms of it being a hold or not a hold, whether it was a running play or a pass play. The 2 deep guys, one on each side, they had responsibilities for the wide out, okay, that was on, again, my guy, my sideline, those 2 guys, far sideline. The guy in the middle kind of had responsibility for the wing back and or the tight end. If they were on the same side, he would have the tight end. If they were opposite, he would have the wing back. And the guy who had this wide out would also have to watch that tight end to see what that person did. Running plays, kind of holding and blocking back towards the ball were kind of the biggest issues. And in pass plays, it was a combination of offensive holding and then offensive pass interference and defensive pass interference. And if all 7 guys were doing their job, there's 7 of us trying to watch 22 of them. And again, the ball's either going to go up the middle, it's going to go to the left, or it's going to go to the right. And once you get that initial read, the responsibilities and, your need to really focus harder on your guys was driven by which direction that play was intended to go. Now, there was reverses and there's things that you've always got to allow for, but 90% of the time, the direction of the play at the snap dictates who's got responsibility for what. The umpire in the middle, he generally had responsibility for the center and the two guards and their action, again, whether they were holding, whether they were going to do a chop block or some other illegal activity right near in the center where he was looking. And then his responsibility on a pass play was to step up to the line of scrimmage and kind of be responsible that none of the offensive linemen were beyond the line of scrimmage when the pass was being thrown. Yes,
What
sir.
about the new rule this year? I call it the muffin tops on their helmets. What's the story on that?
Safety. Everything's
Are-
about
are
safety.
Are you going to make him enforce those players that have to wear it, or they got the option to bow out?
Again, I'm not sure exactly how they're going to enforce it. From my perspective, most of my stories and experience now are a little more dated. But again, anything that they generally put into the rule book that's safety related, they really try to enforce it consistently, early, and often.
Hello?
Question?
Hello? Hey.
Sorry.
This might be personal, but is this what you do for a living? Or do you have, well, I mean, you only work it 6 months out of the year, which is great.
Great question, and I would have starved to death.
But I mean,
Even my wife and kids used to say, is that why you're doing this? So I'll talk about the economics of it. Generally, and again, I worked full-time in the finance world. What I would tell people was from August 15th until the day after Thanksgiving, I would set my internal treadmill at 110 miles an hour. So basically from Sunday afternoon through Thursday night, I would have to get 50 or 60 hours worth of work done for my profession and for my paycheck that fed everybody and kept me from starving to death. Then I would travel Friday morning to the game site and then work the game Saturday. Some nights I would be able to get back, Saturday night by, 10 or 11 o'clock. A lot of the games I was back by noon on Sunday. Hold on 1 second. I can only think one thing at a time. Generally, when I started, okay, I was getting $25 a game here in Western Pennsylvania. I think it's now up to about $85 a game at the high school level. At the college level, at the time I started, it was $75 a game. I think it's now up to about $150 a game at the local college level. At the Big Ten level, when I got in, it was $550. And again, at the Big Ten levels, plus the expenses. These other levels, you're getting $25 and, see ya. But gas was only, less than $1 back then. At the college level now, I think it's about $2,000 a game. I don't talk to the guys all the time. And at the pro level, it can be anywhere from, $5,000 to $20,000 a game at the pro level. Some of that stuff's out there on the website if anybody wants to look at it. I don't pay a lot of attention to it. But the NFL guys can generally make a pretty good, dollar doing this. The college guys and the high school guys, you got to love the sport. Yes, sir.
On the same vein,
And you're next, sir.
who pays for your transportation? Do they schedule it for you, get your tickets to fly there, or do you have to submit and get reimbursed?
Yes, yes, and yes, in part. So most of the places that we would go in the Big Ten, the minimum stay at the hotel generally was, 2 nights, and the hotel rooms even back then were $500 a night. So again, if we did it ourselves, we would go broke. So the Big Ten generally negotiated with a hotel in each of the cities where we would go and stay. We paid for it ourselves, and at the same time then we would submit and get reimbursed for that expense. If it was less than 300 miles, they expected us to drive, and we would get reimbursed the IRS mileage. Over 300 miles, we could fly, standard, not first class or anything, and they would reimburse the flight. And 1 second, because this guy's raised his hand about 4 times. Go ahead. Sure.
Did you start each season in a class where you learned the new rules, or was it just upon you to learn them, to learn the rules and then go take the test?
Okay. So somebody asked about the rule changes each year. We would get bulletins, okay, from the NCAA that would have the new rule changes in them. We as a group would generally meet Thursdays at rotating, other officials' homes and houses to discuss those rule changes and kind of prepare for the test, knowing that a big part of the test was new rules, as well as have to do a refresher, on the prior rules that didn't change.
Right.
So there was a series of study guides and aids that were developed mostly by our internal study groups to do that and facilitate everybody knowing the rules. Like everything else, some guys would be easy to pick up. Some guys, again, we tell them 10 times and they'd still go, there's 4 downs, right? Not really, but you all been there, you know what I'm saying. And I don't mean to make fun of any of my fellow officials. I know it's going to be filmed and some of them will call me and throw rocks at me. I will have more booze coming. Your second question, then we'll go somewhere else.
Were you hurt much seriously ever?
I would generally get knocked down once, occasionally twice a season. And would happen on the sideline. And again, you really have to, it was kind of like a windshield wiper. I mean, you got to see what's going on nonstop. But when the play was coming right in front of me, and there was particularly, let's call it hard contact by 1 or 2 defensive guys who stood somebody up, okay, but he wasn't quite down, and he's still in bounds, and he's still fighting for yardage. And I'm backing up now, where the coach and I we're really good friends now because there's the sideline, and I just don't have any more room to go. And what would happen occasionally, then all of a sudden that pile would fall down, and here would be coming some linebacker hell bent to just wreck that whole pile, and he would have no place to go. So, and he didn't want a penalty for diving on the pile, so he would dive over the pile and end up rolling me up. My approach to not getting, and I was never seriously injured, I would always get airborne. So if they're coming at my legs, I'm jumping. I mean, it looked like one of those cartoon characters. Boom, I'd fall down, they'd come over, I would dust myself off, fix my hat. The game would go on. I mean, some guys have gotten hurt. And you get hurt again when something weird happens and you don't have eyes in the back of your head and somebody hits you and stuff happens. Go ahead.
Yes. In some countries, fan violence is a threat to officials. Have you ever encountered that, or do you do anything to address that?
So most of the time, you're hearing the questions. So most of the time, there's pretty good security. We would generally stay at a hotel that's not on the campus. Everybody knew who we were, but we would always stay together. We never went out anywhere. I mean, we'd go and have a dinner on Friday evening before our 2-hour film study would start, but it would be early before everybody was, fully inebriated and ready to raise hell. The only time I was concerned personally was at Iowa. I was down, it's a sunken bowl. Many of the stadiums were built where you went down into the stadium. So we're at the ground level, and when you come out of the Iowa Stadium, we didn't change at the stadium. We had to go change at the basketball, arena, which was, from here to the parking lot, from the stadium. And we had a really tough game, and it was a Penn State-Iowa game, and Iowa lost at the end on a somewhat controversial call. After the game was over, we voted 7-0 that we made the right call. The rest of the country, I don't think, thought we made the right call. And none of the 80,000 people in Iowa thought we made the right call. So they would cordon off the one aisle. But we'd come out of the corner of the end zone, up, 80, 90 steps, get to ground level. And by that time, the people that weren't cordoned off, they'd come around from the other, exits. And they're creating not exactly a gauntlet, but pretty much a gauntlet for us to have to run through to get from where we were to that basketball arena. They generally had 2 police officers that would accompany us, one in the front, one in the back. There was so much chaos in the crowd after this call that they redirected one of our guys to support other crowd control. We had a female police officer that was probably 35 years old, was 5 foot and maybe weighed 100 pounds. That was our escort through that crowd.
Whoa.
Again, you take off your hat, you take off your whistle, and you put everything in your pockets, and you just try to stay together and try to get out of there. So in my 21 years, that was the only time that I truly, when I got to that locker room, I was like, this could have been a mess. I mean, we collectively, we wrote a letter to the AD at Iowa and said, you got to find a better way to do this. At Ohio State, you come off, you jump in a police car. They whisk you about 2 miles. So even as the people are coming out and getting ready to throw stuff at you, you're in a police car. And there's generally, it used to be a convoy of 3 or 4 police cars that we would just jump into as fast as we could get off the field. They'd be going 80 miles an hour. And again, the roads were blocked off, but nonetheless, you still got people trying to run across. And I used to just close my eyes and wait till we got back to the football office and say hallelujah. So you never really felt it, except at the very end of occasionally controversial games. And I wouldn't have been very good at this if I didn't have some controversy following me in and out. Anybody wants to take my name and do a Google search, there were several articles out there that I should be drawn and quartered and never get to work a Penn State game again. So comes with the territory.
Well, that's the way you know you're over the target, right?
Exactly.
Could you talk a little bit about, you said you did refereeing a national championship game. What's that like when you got, 90,000 people screaming and it's a big game and so forth? Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's interesting. You sing the Star Spangled Banner here, and every game that I worked, every place that I worked, when they sing the Star Spangled Banner before the game, and you realize there's 7 guys out here going to work this football game, and there's 114,000 people in the stands, I got goosebumps. Every game I worked, before the game, when they sang the Star Spangled Banner, I got goosebumps. Then, it's like everything else. Then I had to go to work. So once you go to work, the rest of it all becomes kind of, extraneous noise. I mean, you hear it a little bit. I was always attuned on the sideline to the head coach. So they could have 13 people over there, hollering at me about something, but the only time I was really focused to listen was when the head coach said something. And they all, in the beginning, you've got to introduce yourself, but it generally doesn't take one game with them, and after that, for better or worse, they know who you are. And he would come over and say, Jack, just touch me on the shoulder and, turn around like Coach Paterno did in the picture. He was not happy that day. And after about the 3rd time of him just screaming at me and spitting kind of on me, I put my hand up and said, that's enough. And I'll tell you that story in a second. That was the photograph that ended up in the Saturday New York Times up in New York. So it made me famous in the Penn State world for quite a while. But the interesting part about working the national championship game is it's the biggest college game of the year. The game I had was Oklahoma and Florida State. And the pregame to that was a little more, what's the right word, distracting. I mean, normally we'd have a Friday night, dinner. We'd have breakfast early Saturday morning. We'd get to the game site. We'd be, somewhat sequestered in a locker room and going through all of our pregame ritual and getting ready, for that game. The evening games are a little more complicated. This game was a night game, so the day drags on. There's more involved. And when we get to the stadium, it was in the Orange Bowl down in Miami. We get to the stadium and we generally have a locker room, but for this particular game, they put us in 2 locker rooms. And then they invited a whole bunch of people to come in and meet us and say hello, and we were the celebrities. But meantime, we're trying to prepare, to go work the biggest game of the year with all this new distraction. So that was it threw us off a little bit. But at one point, we all squeezed into the one locker room for about a half hour, closed the door, and didn't let anybody in. And I was with really seasoned guys at that point, so we were able to, get our pregame stuff organized and ready to go reasonably efficiently, although all those distractions can become, interference. You go out, you walk around the field, the teams are fired up, then the crowd starts to roll in, and we've all been in front of, the $100,000 people crowds for years leading up to that. So it's not necessarily the size of the crowd, and pretty much many of the Big Ten games, even back then, were on national television. So, it wasn't that big of a difference. I happened to, and again, once the pregame, once you have everything, the other, I think, funny part, they did fireworks coming up out of the ground, which was the first time I had seen that. So I would bring the team out, and I brought the Florida State team out. And as I'm bringing them out, I want to step to the side and get out of the way because here comes 80 kids running faster than me that want to get out there in the prime time. The fireworks people grabbed me and pulled me because I was standing right by one of the fireworks. So whoosh. So yeah, there's always something a little crazy or a little different the higher the level and the more exposure of the game. I happened to call the first penalty in that game, which was a block in the back on a punt play on the, I don't know, second or third series. And Coach Bowden comes over and he taps me on the shoulder and he goes, Jack, you know, they've been telling me all week that you guys from the Big Ten are going to be sticklers for the rules. He said, I said, yes. He said, I don't even know what rule that was that you called. Hold on, excuse me. I said, Coach, it was a block in the back. They added that rule, you know, a couple of years ago. And he said, are you sure that's the right call? I said, I am 100% sure. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be here. So at that point, he said, okay. He turned and he walks away. The next thing that happens in that game is the Florida State had wide rushers who were supposedly, you know, really good athletes and players. They weren't putting any pressure on the Oklahoma quarterback. And they collectively on the Florida State side decided that the Oklahoma tackles had kind of stepped back and given them a better angle. So the, I don't know, 6'8", 300-pound defensive line coach comes over and starts telling me the Oklahoma tackles are too far back. So I take a look, you know, they're borderline, but they're okay. So I go out one time the far tackle he was back just a little bit, but not in that gray area that I talked about earlier. And I asked him to move up a little bit, and now the defensive line coach, and he's huge. I said, stand right behind me. You can see fine. You look down here and you tap me on the shoulder the first time you think they're back too far. So he watches 3 or 4 plays, and I get the hand, and he turns and walks away. That means I'm winning. When I get the hand and they walk away, they've surrendered. They give up. They'll find something else later, but they've given up on that point. Then we come out in the second half. The Florida State tackles, like, they're 4 yards in the backfield. I go to the defensive line coach. He goes, what do you want me for? I said, well, I don't know what you told your offensive line coach, but obviously you told him I wasn't going to call that, so he should move his guys back a little bit. He looks at me and goes, nah. I go, well, I'm going to call a penalty here soon, and when your offensive line coach comes over and starts screaming at me, I'm going to tell him he should be screaming at you. So I go out, I tell the Florida State guys, I said, you're starting to get back too far, get back up to the line of scrimmage, or it'll be a foul the next time I see it. So they move up, and I see the 2 of those coaches over there chit-chatting on the sideline. They both give me the hand. So at that point, I'm not going to hear from them anymore during that game.
I worked for a number of years for Eugene Klein on the San Diego Chargers, and I was fortunate enough to be able to sit behind the bench on a lot of home games. And I got to tell you, and you can probably verify this, I think I would have a better chance tackling a dump truck on 79 than I would some of those guys coming at you.
Well, I retired 7 years ago after my 21-year, tour of duty, in part because I could no longer, at 61, I could no longer run with 20-year-olds. And the other thing is I couldn't see as well at night. I don't know about how everybody in this crowd is, but my vision at nighttime, I don't know that I could put the ball that far from the goal line in a night game anymore. So I knew it was time to turn it over to younger guys. Yes, sir.
When you have had the experience, I'm sure you have, of a player coming up to you and saying, "This guy's holding me," and maybe come back 2 or 3 times to tell the same official, "This guy's holding me," but you're not calling it.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, I played in Division I level, journeyman player, not anything outstanding, and I was playing against a guy named Ron Kramer who was playing for Idaho State at that time, and he was running over me. I mean, I basically he rolled me up each play, and I was trying to keep him off our quarterback, so I would grab his jersey and
Sure, yank him down. Yank him down. Yeah.
pulled him down,
Uh-huh.
and he was screaming at the officials.
Uh-huh.
And in the game, in the third quarter, they never called it. Well, our quarterback completed about a 50-yard pass. That one he caught. But I'm asking the question because that was, and I sort of know your answer, but how much does the player influence you when he's calling a situation like that?
Sure. So there's, in the gray area, there's cause and effect. And so, generally speaking, if there was a situation where a defensive player came over and complained about an offensive player, I would go out where it was audible to everybody and say something like 66, keep your hands inside. Because if you grab somebody inside here, I really can't see it standing over there, okay? But if he starts to get away and you grab him so that his shoulders turn, or you yank him down, those are things that are easier for me to view. Now, if you happen to yank him, this gets a little further complicated in that gray area. If you happen to yank him down and it was a quick pass to the other side of the field and it really had no effect on the play, I've got a little bit of latitude to do what's called just pass on that foul. If it happened to be something that was on this side in front of me and I see that happen, I'm inclined to call that foul 10 times in a row. My own personal experience, the tight ends at Wisconsin were basically coached as tackles, and then they just put an eligible number on them. And so my good friend up there, whose name right now escapes me, the head coach, Barry Alvarez, when I was up there, Barry, pregame, we'd be out shaking hands and walking around, and he'd say, well, are you going to have your obligatory 2 holding calls on my tight end today? I said, Barry, you coach them up as tackles. You put eligible numbers on them, and then they hold people. What do you expect me to do? So the tight end came out, I don't know, third play of the game, they run a sweep, they run it to my side. He grabs the linebacker, and they're jostling. They fall down. I have a holding call. Barry's screaming. That wasn't a holding call. He lost his footing. He fell. So we run it back. What do? They run the same play, the same place the next time, and the same thing happens. I have another foul, same 89, same tight end. I go, Barry, you got to at least run it to the other side. Come on. You keep running over here, I'm going to keep calling it. So you try to get their attention. It's a game of, there's big guys and little guys. I'll tell you 1 or 2 more stories and I'll wrap up. One of the, and again, Coach Paterno and I had gotten to be pretty good friends over the years because of my involvement up there with spring practices, the spring game, the fall clinics, or the fall practices. And they would do a rules clinic for the team, and I was generally the guy who would do the rules update for the team. And he would give me the microphone, and he would sit down, and the kids were always amazed that he was going to let me speak to them, pretty much unrestrained, used to be one of his words. And again, he was generally a supporter within the Big Ten of the officials. I know there was some stuff along the way that didn't look that way, but we have a game, it's that same 97 season, Penn State's at Miami. And once again, I'm on the Penn State sideline. Penn State's winning pretty handily. I don't know, it's like, 28-10. We're in the third quarter. The kid from Penn State breaks away. It looks like he's going to score. And there's a clipping foul on the other side by my line judge. It brings back the touchdown. So now everybody's nerves are frayed. And, I've got Coach Paterno in my ear. That wasn't a foul. It wasn't a foul. Well, don't you know, then they fumble the ball, and Miami scores. And they intercept the pass. Miami scores. And now it's 28-24. There's a couple minutes left in the game, and they run a counter. And so the halfback's got the ball. The guard that pulled, the linebacker didn't see him. He crashed. So now I got one little skinny cornerback out here. I got a 6'6", 280-pound behemoth who runs, a 4.8, getting ready to bury him. And the halfback's right behind him, and there's like no other Penn State guy in sight. So he gets him, he drives him into the ground, the kid goes 60 yards for a touchdown. For the last 40 yards of that, Coach Paterno is chasing me. That was holding, that was holding, that was holding. So we have the kickoff, and I have to go up and stand up there right after the kickoff. He goes, I'm going to get you fired. Coach, he said, that was the biggest holding call in the country, and you missed it. Okay, so let me go back to work now. So first play, they kick off, goes in the end zone, and there's, I don't know, 2 minutes to go in the game. The quarterback from Penn State goes down and goes to throw the out. I remember Chaffee Fields. I don't remember who the quarterback was, but the cornerback bites on it. Chaffee Fields goes right around him. They lob the ball to Fields, who's now going to go 80 yards down my sideline. So he's running, and I'm following him down the field, And at one point, his foot comes very close to the white sideline. And Coach Paterno's right there. He's inbounds, he's inbounds, he's inbounds. We go right down there. I put my hands up. We have that kickoff. There's about a minute to go in the game. Blah, blah, blah. Game plays out. They win 35-31. He comes over, he puts his arm around me. He goes, I guess I don't have to get you fired now. Thanks, Coach. Couple more questions, and I'll wrap it up.
Can you touch on the gambling aspect of collegiate football? Have you folks ever been approached, and if so, what's the process?
So we talk about it a lot. I was never approached personally. I was never involved in a game where I was concerned that there was anything untoward that was happening in that game. There is a lot of gambling. There's generally people want to know kind of occasionally want to talk to us about players or a given player. You know, again, we get there on a Friday, you walk into a hotel and, you know, whether you're at Notre Dame or Michigan or Stanford or wherever I was going, there's always somebody hanging around the hotel who knows as we're coming in, you know, who we are. And invariably they'll say, oh, we understand, blah, 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 you know, got hurt in practice on Wednesday and is probably not going to play tomorrow. I go, that's fine. I don't know who the hell you're talking about, but okay. So there was always, you know, a little bit of concern, a little bit of an element out there. But as the 7 guys who traveled together, I mean, we would talk about it. Was anybody approached, and is there anybody that we need to contact, you know, the officials about? I mean, the not the officials for the game, but, you know, the police. So, hold on. Does that answer your question?
One last part of that. When are you notified as to what game you'll be reffing in?
Generally 3 weeks in advance.
3 weeks?
3 weeks in advance. I would get a schedule that would tell me if I was going to have any off weeks. So generally by the 1st of September, I would know whether I was going to work, you know, 10, 11, or 12 games. But the exact sites of my games, I only knew 3 weeks in advance. So the 1st of September, I would get week 1, 2, and 3, and then as each week I worked the game, I would get the third week out game that like following Tuesday.
Well, I understand in the NFL, those guys get noted 3 days before the game?
I think the gambling issue with the NFL is probably a lot bigger because there's so much money. So that doesn't surprise me, but from an accommodation and logistics standpoint, they gave us basically 3 weeks to, you know, put the travel plans together.
Fine.
Somebody way in the back? The answer is yes and no. There's not necessarily a performance in terms of my ability to run the 100-yard dash in, you know, I don't know, 16 or 18 seconds or whatever the hell it would take me. Excuse me. What? There was a requirement to get an annual physical, you know, from your PCP and submit, you know, the results of that physical, including a statement from your doctor that said, in their opinion, you were in. You know, whatever, but it was my performance, you know, the performance in the game. I mean, you see guys again that, say that again, sir? I didn't hear you. No. And again, the Big Ten wanted to protect themselves by having the statement from our doctor that said, you know, he certified that we were in satisfactory condition to work the schedule we had to work. One last question.
You mentioned you started in Pee Wee football and went up to national championship, and you also mentioned that the Star Spangled Banner always gave you chills. At what level of competition does it become customary or mandatory to do the national anthem?
You know, I don't remember, but I think it first started to stick with me at high school games.
High school.
I mean, I don't think they did a Star Spangled Banner. Occasionally you might, you know, if there was a some kind of a playoff game or something where they wanted to have more, pomp and ceremony, they would, play it. But at the high school level, the band always played it, and clearly at the college level, it was always.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Jack, thank you very much for coming out.